welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David begins a series on the Book of Ruth as he asks the question, what kind of person do you want to become? Let's listen.
All right, I'm going to describe a situation, and I just want to pretend that this situation is happening to you. So put yourself in these shoes. I want you to pretend that you're walking down the streets of uptown Charlotte, and then you see this wallet. And the wallet's just laying there on the sidewalk, and you pick it up, and there's $1,000 in cash in the wallet. But there's also an ID, and on the back of an ID is a phone number. Now, in this situation, you're also a poor college student, okay? So you're like, ooh, I could really use some extra cash. I need to buy some books. I'm a little hungry. I want to go out to these local restaurants. And you're faced with the decision of what do I do with this wallet? Now, I want you to pretend that in this scenario, you do the right thing, okay? So you call the number, you return the wallet, and the person is a little bit surprised. He's counting his money going, wow, it's all here. And he says, well, why did you return my wallet? And the answer you provide is, I wanted to be the type of person who returns a wallet. Okay, that's what I want you to think about today, because you didn't make the decision based on what was easiest, did you? You didn't make the decision based on what was most profitable. You made the decision based on who you wanted to become. Every day, we face decisions like that. Usually not about random wallets, but decisions about honesty, about integrity, about showing compassion to someone or acting in faithfulness. And in those situations, the question should never be, what's the easiest thing to do right now? The deeper question is, what kind of person do I want to become? That question sits at the heart of the Book of Ruth. And we are going to explore this book for the next 5 weeks. We'll immerse ourselves in Ruth's story and the story of her family. And I think what you're going to discover is that Ruth has to make a decision in today's scripture that will profoundly affect the rest of her life. And my hope is that we will be inspired to follow her example based on the decision that she makes today. So today, we're going to get the setting, the characters, and we're really going to immerse ourselves in the beginning of the story of Ruth. Here's how it starts in chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. So the first verse has given us the setting of this story. The story of Ruth takes place in the time when the judges ruled. Now, I don't want you to think of judges like we do today, judges ruling in a courtroom. These judges were different. So in this time period of the Bible, there were the 12 tribes of Israel, but there was no king. So no king united the 12 tribes of Israel. Instead, you had these kind of local leaders, kind of clan leaders that they called the judges. And the judges would kind of help people decide what to do and make decisions. But this time period of the book of Judges, it's probably one of the most chaotic time periods in the Bible. Here's a description from the book of Judges itself. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this was a chaotic and frankly dangerous and violent time period when everyone just did what they thought was right. They didn't have any, united structure to say, this is what we should do. It's, no, this is how I want to treat people. This is how I think I should behave. This is what I think is right. That's the setting of the story that Ruth lived in. And to make matters worse, as you heard from the children's message, there's a famine. There's a famine in the land, which meant there was no food for them to produce. Now, in our story, there's a family that's consisting of a mother, a father, and 2 sons from Bethlehem. And they have a choice to make. Do they try to ride out the famine in Bethlehem? Do they just try to spend as long as they can in their hometown and survive until food starts growing again? Or do they choose to travel somewhere else in search of food? What would you do if you were in their situation? Well, the family decides to leave their home and travel to the neighboring country of Moab. Now, this in itself is actually shocking that they would go to the country of Moab because historically, the Moabites and the Israelites were enemies of one another. For instance, in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses tells people that Israelites cannot even invite Moabites into worship. That's how separated they had to be. We see in chapter 23, verse 3 of Deuteronomy, no Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. That's how deep that grudge goes, that it goes all the way for 10 generations, saying, no, if you're a Moabite, we do not want you in worship. Now, the feud happened because of something that happened in the book of Numbers, when God's people were wandering in the wilderness and they needed safe passage through Moab. And at that time period, the Moabites said, no, we do not want to give you safe passage. And because of that resentment, that grudge had been building for generations between these two groups of people. So you can see how desperate this family of Israelites, this family of four, had to be to even leave their country and say, we're going to go to Moab. We're going to go to a place that we know they don't really like us, we don't really like them, but we've heard that there's food there. That's the setting of our story. Now let me introduce you to our characters. Here's our characters. The characters are Elimelech, the father, Naomi, the mother, Mahlon is the son, and he marries Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah. She is a Moabite. And then Kilian, the other son, marries Ruth, also a Moabite. Now, does that surprise you a little bit based on what I just told you about Moabites, that they would find people to marry in this country? Well, it turns out they were there for 10 years, and they decide to really settle down in the country of Moab. And this becomes, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of the book of Ruth that pops up a couple of times. What you see in Ruth is, instead of just a blanket condemnation of Moabites, saying, hey, don't associate with them, we have the messier reality of two groups of people simply trying to survive. And did you notice that Ruth herself is a Moabite? That comes into play a little bit later. So this newly formed family of 6, they spend 10 years in Moab. They've made a life now together in this foreign country. They have found food and a new beginning. But then disaster strikes. The father, Elimelech, dies, as does his 2 sons. We pick this up, the story, in verse 5. It says, Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now, this was an incredibly dangerous situation in this time period, because in this time period, to be a woman meant that you were not allowed to own property. You did not have access to resources or income. You relied on your husband or your father for most of those things. And so when her husband Elimelech died, well, she would have depended on her sons for those resources. And when they too died, she was facing just abject poverty as her future. Remember, in the ancient world, there was no such thing as life insurance. There's no such thing as a pension. There was no safety net for a person like Naomi. So she was left with nothing. After 10 years, what does she decide to do? Well, the only thing she thinks she can do, which is return home. Return home to Bethlehem, hoping that she'll find some family there that still remember her, that can take her in. So at this point in the story is when we're really going to start diving into the scriptures, because what Naomi tells her daughter-in-laws is, you go back to your families in Moab. You go back and start a new life for yourself. You're still young. You can remarry, start a new family. That's going to be your best course of action, while I, Naomi, just go back to Bethlehem. We'll pick it up in verse 11. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband." Now, for Ruth and Orpah, this is the right move. They are still young and they can remarry. And again, in this society, that would have been the primary way that they could have taken care of themselves long term. Naomi, she believes she's at the age that she cannot remarry any longer, so she can offer no protection to her daughters-in-law. But in verse 14, we're told this: "At this they wept aloud again, and then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her." Okay, well, this is a little bit interesting, isn't it? Orpah heeds the advice and says, "Yes, I will go start that new life. That's the right thing for me to do." But Ruth clings to Naomi. She does not want to leave her side. Naomi, though, insists. In verse 15, "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." So it's like, come on, Ruth, get with the program. Go follow Orpah. This is your best opportunity at a new life. But Ruth does not go. And have you noticed that in the book of Ruth, she has not yet spoken? I mean, it's named after her, but we haven't heard from her yet. She speaks for the first time in verse 16, and these words become some of the most famous and well-known words in the Old Testament. You sung them in the first song we sang. They become a shining example of dedication and commitment from one person to another. I'm going to read her words all at once, and then we're going to break them down a little bit further. But here's her response. "But Ruth replied, 'Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me.'" I mean, what beautiful words of commitment that we see here. Ruth promises to journey with Naomi no matter where that journey takes them. Have you ever heard the expression, "Don't hitch your wagon to the wrong horse"? I think that's exactly what Ruth is doing here. I mean, Naomi would not be the right horse in this situation. I mean, she would be one that's probably not even going to finish the race. She's going back to her home country, but she is poor and she has no prospects of any safe gathering space. And yet, Ruth says, "Where you go, I'm going to go." So let's take a closer look at her words of commitment. She says, first, "Where you go, I will go." So Ruth is choosing the life of a journey. She is choosing Naomi, even though it leaves her homeland of Moab. Now, we don't believe that Ruth had ever been to Bethlehem before. So she is choosing a whole new land. And she says, "Where you stay, I will stay." What that means is that Ruth is she's not making just a temporary offer of kindness. Ruth is not saying, "I'll travel with you to make sure you get there safely, and then I will go back home." She says, "Where you make your home, that's where I'm going to make my home as well." And remember, at this point, Naomi doesn't have a home. So it's like Ruth is saying, even if we have to sleep under the stars, where you are, that's where I will be as well. She says, "Your people will become my people." Ruth is going to cross these social and ethnic boundaries. A Moabite woman choosing to live among Israelites, even with the painful history between these two groups of people. And perhaps most shocking, your God will become my God. This, I think, is the deepest part of this vow, that Ruth is not only choosing Naomi, she is choosing Naomi's God. I think that over the 10 years that they spent together, she fell in love with not just Naomi, but Naomi's God. Over that decade, she came to know and experience the deep love of God that we still experience today. And she was not ready to give that up. So she commits not only to Naomi, but to having faith in the Lord Almighty. And then finally, she says, "And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Now, in the ancient world, where you were buried was incredibly important. To be buried with a people meant to be permanently identified with them. So if an Israelite, for example, died when they were in another country, their remains were almost always brought back to Israel, back to their hometown, and buried there. So it is like Ruth is saying, I am permanently going to be identified with you and your people. How do you say no to that? No, Naomi doesn't. We're told in verse 18, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Determined. I think that's a pretty good word choice here. Ruth is determined to do what she believes is right. And she believes that the right thing to do is to commit the rest of her life to Naomi, even with all the uncertainty that is surrounding her future. Okay, at this point, I want us to do the best job we can to put ourselves in the mind of Ruth. And I'd like for us to ask a simple question. Why? Why did she choose to dedicate herself in this way to Naomi? What was her motivation to make this commitment? I mean, Ruth does not tell us explicitly, and so we are left to guess, to create theories based on our reading of Scripture. I mean, I think as I read this week and studied this, the most likely explanation is simply that Ruth loved Naomi and could not imagine letting her make this journey alone, this journey of a widow with no protection. So Ruth chose the harder path for the person that she loved. As I reflected on that this week, it made me realize that many people make decisions based on what benefits them in the moment. But Ruth, she made a decision based on who she wanted to be in the future. She wanted to be the type of person who sacrificed for those that she loved. This is one of the main lessons that we have here in this early portion of the book of Ruth. Consider who you want to become. Not who you are today, but who you are going to be a year from now. I mean, I bet we all have this image of who we will be in the future that we would love to see come to life. A future self that has mastered certain virtues or has accomplished certain things or learned certain skills. What would it look like to make decisions today based on who you want to be tomorrow? Imagine a high school freshman who's trying out for the basketball team. And he tries out because he wants to make the team, but he's shorter than everybody else. He's a little bit slower than everybody else, and he's cut almost immediately. And on the ride home, his dad asks him, so, do you think you're done with basketball? And he says, no, I want to be the type of person that could make that team someday. And so the next morning, he wakes up, and without anyone telling him what to do, he starts running. He starts working out. Over the course of the summer, he starts shooting hoops. He starts practicing. Over the course of the year, he starts making decisions not based on who he is, but based on what he wants to become. Every day, what if he woke up and asked himself a simple question? Not what do I feel like doing today, but what would the player that I want to become do today? If we ask those sort of questions, well, we could be the type of player that makes that team. And if he made that team, what I want us to realize is that the decision was not just one big action made on the day of tryouts. The difference was hundreds of small decisions made long before anybody saw those results. That's exactly how character is formed. I mean, again, most people make decisions based on who they are right now. But I think Ruth, she made decisions based on the type of person she wanted to become. So when Naomi turned to her and said, go back to Moab, Ruth could have chosen the easy path. But instead, she chose what she considered to be the faithful path. She didn't ask, what is easiest for me today? She asked, what kind of person do I want to become? Character is simply tomorrow's person being built by today's choices. So, for example, each day I can wake up and ask myself, what would tomorrow's David wish that I would have done with my time today? And it's actually a very interesting exercise if you ask yourself that. Like, what would the version of you tomorrow hope that you end up doing today? And when I answer that question, I would say, well, I would think tomorrow's self would want myself today to wake up and spend some time with God, to really immerse myself in the scriptures first thing when I wake up and connect with God. I think tomorrow's version of myself would want to make sure that I did my best to eat right, to stay active, that I did the best job I can to work on patience and showing grace to my children. There's all sorts of things that we can do today that are going to form who we become tomorrow. This is what Ruth did. She wanted to become the type of person that sacrificed for those that she loved, the type of person who would do what was right, even if it was the hard thing. So who do you want to be? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, at the end of your life, what qualities do you hope others describe you with? That you were faithful, generous, courageous, compassionate? The truth is that those sorts of words are not formed all at once. That person is formed one decision at a time, one act of kindness, one difficult conversation expressed in love, one prayer, one sacrifice, one choice to do the right thing instead of the easy thing. So perhaps that is God's invitation to us this week. Don't worry about becoming a great saint overnight, but just ask, what is the faithful thing for me to do today? And then do it. Because today,
if you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook. This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.